Thanks, Todd, and welcome everybody. Welcome to the Future of AI-Driven Test Automation. This is the next webinar in our Coveros webinar series, and I'm really excited about this one today. So those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO and founder of Coveros. I've started and run a couple of software consulting companies over the last 30, 35 years. I've been building testing software all during that period of time. I do a lot of writing and speaking on all things associated with what I call a modern software development process, improving your agility, accelerating delivery, automating your testing, integrating security, all those kinds of things. And those are obviously the types of things that we do at Coveros. I'm also the technical editor of Agile Connection. If you're not familiar with Agile Connection, it is a free online community of DevOps and Agile professionals. We publish fresh content on a very regular basis, blogs, articles, interviews, other things. And so if you're interested in those subjects, I encourage you to sign up for free. You can do that at agileconnection.com. Today, I have a very special guest, longtime friend and colleague, and I will let him introduce himself. Welcome to the webinar series, Tariq.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Yeah, just a little bit about myself. So I think at the core of everything, I just love software and software testing. I've been in a couple different roles. Currently now at Test.io, which is an EPAM company, as part of their executive leadership team. But I think just looking back at like my career journey, it's been kind of a mix of like starting in academia, heading into industry, being in industry in more of an individual contributor role, and then working up the ranks as a leader, and then stepping into the world of AI and machine learning, so crossing over a little bit from quality into AI, and then now finally sitting kind of at that intersection where now everything is AI, including quality. So just happy to be here, Jeff.
Awesome. Tariq, I'm kind of curious how you got into software, into computer science. Where did that passion come from? Did you grow up writing code or, playing with robots? What is it that kind of drove you to move in the direction that you've gone?
Yeah, so I think two things come to mind here. Number one, I remember being 3 years old, and my stepdad at the time, he had bought a computer. And, I won't date myself, but it was, not your typical computer that you would think of these days. There was a little bit of a tape machine involved. And you used to have to press play on that tape, walk away for hours and come back. And then you'd be able to actually do something meaningful with the machine. And he told me like, hey, I know you like all of these games and that's what you primarily come to the computer for, but you're not just going to play games. You're going to learn how to program computer. And back then we used to they used to sell these books with programs in them, so you could literally like program your own game in BASIC if you wanted to. And lo and behold, I started writing code from like 3 years old, but kind of more copy paste scribing and executing and learning from that perspective. I think the other thing that started from a very early age with me was just natural curiosity and wanting to learn how things work and pick them apart. And so I remember when I was old enough to get my own computer, my mother bought a PC for me, and I wanted to add like a sound card and multimedia kit to it. And she came home, and lo and behold, I had picked down the entire computer, and all the parts were all over, and she was about to freak out. And she said, "Hey, what did you do? You broke the computer." I'm like, "Just please close the door and let me finish what I'm doing." So I just always had this natural curiosity of how things work, and kind of led me into like thinking about both computer programming and how to kind of test software and hardware actually.
Yeah, you can tell by your passion that, this is not just a job for you. I resonate with that. I started programming, Apple I, Apple II, so I probably predate you by just a little bit. But I did have a Commodore 64 that had a cassette tape storage device associated with it. So I'm familiar with what you were describing. But yeah, I mean, for me, software's always been a hobby first, right? I code for fun. That's what I like
Yeah,
to do. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and it does make your professional life enjoyable when you can work in an area that you actually really you like and you're passionate about. So sounds like you
this
found your
is true.
calling.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very similar, I think, journey.
Awesome. So we're going to start off, audience, with a quick poll. We always like to know where the audience is in terms of your capabilities in the topic area. And the question we have for you today is, what do you use AI for in test automation today? That's what we're going to be talking about. Pick all the different things that apply to you. Now, if you pick, we don't use AI, and you pick the others, we're going to kind of wonder about you, but that's okay. Pick whatever applies to you and hit submit. And after we've had some votes, we'll see what the audience is using AI for today in test automation. You got any predictions, Tariq, on particular things that we identified here that are going to be, things that are probably going to be at the top of the list?
Yeah, I mean, it's always there. Self-healing and broken test scripts, like people are always into that. I think
Mm-hmm.
these days, test script generation will have more of a pull than it used to have back in the day. Um, Maybe a little bit less on the bug prediction. People are always interested in that, but it's just such a fuzzy thing that some
Mm-hmm.
people are like, "Oh, I don't know where to go." But yeah, these are good items there. Maybe very few we don't use AI, but yeah, who knows? Maybe.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
bet
yeah,
if we had done this poll a couple years ago, the percentage of people that said they didn't use AI would be a lot greater.
yeah,
Not that they weren't using AI. We'll talk about this later, but if you can't see it, sometimes you don't know
yeah,
what's behind, the application that you're using. As you and
yeah,
I know, AI has been around for a very long time. And I always joke that as soon as AI solves a problem and is used to solve a problem, people don't think it's AI anymore. Like AI for
yeah,
most people is something that's out there in the future, or it's something that they just can't comprehend a computer can do. Once the computer can do it, well, it's not AI anymore, right? Yeah, it's just
yeah.
what
It
we do
has to
now,
be,
right?
yeah, it has to be a little bit beyond reach, right? Like
Exactly.
innovative, so innovative. But yeah,
Which is
poor AI
fascinating.
they get a hard life there in like being accepted. But by the time they get accepted on something, it's like, nope, you need to do more. You need to do more.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious. So, obviously right now, Gen AI and chatbots are all the rage. And I'm just kind of curious when they will become so a part of everything that we do, because they're being integrated into every application, every discipline and domain. When are chatbots and kind of, just kind of chat GPT type Gen AI stuff going to be not considered AI either, or is it because it's so in front of you and you have to interact with it explicitly that maybe people will think of that as AI longer after it's become kind of part of everything? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. I think it will. I think it'll remain AI because of what you said. I always use the analogy that like Chat GPT made AI believable. I call it believable AI. But meaning that it become very visible, it is very understandable, easy to comprehend. So I think that because of that, it'll always be still recognized like this is AI. But I do also feel it's quickly becoming one of those things that kind of just feels like, oh, search just became more intelligent, and search
Mm-hmm.
just became more accessible because now I can just chat with a bot and find out all the things that I probably would have had to like hop around to a couple websites to find, and now it's here at my fingertips. So I think once it becomes a little bit more trusted, as we'll probably talk about later as well, it'll also still be recognized as AI, but not something that is far out there, like we were saying. It's just
Yeah.
commonplace.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Todd, you want to pop up the results of the poll? Let's see what the audience is thinking today. All right. Okay. So it looks
Oh,
like
we
in
go.
terms of people using AI, as you kind of predicted, Tariq, test script generation is definitely at the top. Lots of people aren't yet using AI. in
Yeah,
test
look at that.
automation. So we have a good engaged audience looking for insights and thoughts about it, which is awesome. What's
That
next?
bucket on
Regression testing. What do you think?
that bucket on other uses is pretty big. I wonder what that 14% of other is all about. That's a good looking one there.
Jeff, I was going to
Yeah,
say, for anyone who has that, they can certainly throw that in the chat so we can see what they're using it for.
yeah, definitely. If you picked other uses, throw it into chat. Also, put your questions, as Todd mentioned, into chat. We will have time at the end to answer some questions. But yeah, no, these are interesting stats. I'm really interested to get your thoughts as we go through this, Tariq, on what's going on out there. Very cool.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, like, I'm happy to see actually that there's less self-healing and broken test scripts.
Mm-hmm.
Not that there's anything wrong with these tools, but that used to be kind of like the primary thing when people were thinking about
Yeah.
AI and testing. And it's good to see that more folks are like using AI to actually generate test scripts instead of trying to fix broken selectors. So
Yeah,
happy about
I
that.
feel like that's one of the outcomes of Gen AI, right? And you talking about it, being in something you can now visualize and see and leverage. Is before Gen AI, that seemed like something that wasn't really possible for a lot of people. I know you've been working in this industry a long time and have been involved in some testing startups that have done some incredibly great work on generating test cases and doing things like that. But I don't think most people really saw that as something that was, I guess, feasible. You know what I'm saying? Until Gen
Yeah.
AI popped up and started showing people that no, there actually is a way to do this and do it pretty well.
Yeah, like I said, made it believable, put it right at their fingertips, which was usually one of the biggest things that we would get people asking us in the startup world. Like,
Mm-hmm.
show me the AI, show me how it works. Like, I see that you can generate scripts, but like, how's it doing that? And now
What
everyone can
magic
just
you got back there?
kind of do it. So it's good.
All right, we're going to go into a discussion point in the webinar here. Tariq, some questions for you. So give me your perspective. We talked a little bit about it just now, but more perspective on the current state of the practice for the use of AI in test automation. Like, what's out there that's real and legit and is usable today, in your opinion?
Yeah, Jeff. I mean, I think like you mentioned earlier, like with the advent of like GPT, especially GPT-4, a lot of the practice right now, and it's not just about OpenAI's model, but all the other models that are out there that are also prominent. A lot of the large language model and text generation has led us to a place where we can literally just, with a few prompts, use AI to do a lot of testing tasks that were previously thought of as like only manually could we do these things, generating test cases, generating test data, um, doing things like test planning or getting ideas for how to structure our testing and optimize different parts of it. Code level, introspection of like, what is this code doing or where could it be broken? So, I mean, right now, like the state of the practice is that everything is currently like on fire. Everything is up for grabs. People are heavily engaged in how can we integrate this into our life cycle? How can we use it? But then on another end, there are still very much like legal hurdles stopping a lot of the companies and organizations from actually getting into generative AI officially for their company. Either they might be working on something that's quite proprietary, and there's different ways that they can navigate around that, and I've helped some companies be able to navigate some of those hurdles. But others just simply can't just pick up a model that has been pre-trained and have to train their own model. And that is a greater
Expensive.
investment in their team and their time and effort. So, I mean, we have things on fire and like very much active. And then we have folks who are thinking, well, how can I not miss this opportunity, but also like adhere to the constraints that I'm faced with?
Yeah, and I think and that might be the reason why when we polled the audience, there was a pretty large percentage of people not using AI for test automation because maybe their organizations aren't using AI for almost anything yet, right? Because they have concerns. They might be privacy concerns, IP concerns, other concerns that are out there that you just alluded to that are still being worked in terms of figuring out how is this all going to work and what is acceptable and not acceptable and what's legal and not legal. Maybe that's one of the reasons why, people haven't yet fully embraced, AI in business in general, if not just for testing, test automation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of the first things that comes up in a conversation, usually with folks. And I've spent quite a bit of time at least establishing like that you can, it doesn't always happen out of the box, but you can set this all up to be private, to be secure, to be enterprise ready, for your organization. And that's where I find myself helping folks the most, is trying to figure out that legal part and how to actually into a private infrastructure. Of course, if they're in a domain where they really do have to train their own models, then they have a serious cost benefit analysis to kind of look at, because at that point it becomes, like you said, a bigger investment and a bigger ask. And normally folks shelling out the dollars want to see the return on their investment. So you really have to come and know how to present your case, which is also fine. But I think you're right. Like most people are still in that area where, hey, can I really trust this? And even if I can, like, my organization or my particular domain doesn't really allow me to just pick up these pre-trained models and use them. So how do I getting my own model trained, data, etc.? Big questions.
Those are big questions. So let's talk a little bit about the types of tests that you can automate. Do you see any differences between the effectiveness of being able to automate, let's say, your unit tests associated with your code to your integration, or your system tests, your functional tests, your non-functional tests? Do you feel like, just based on the way a LLM works, that they're going to give you the same amount of kind of accuracy and quality, or not, given different types of testing? What have you seen out there?
Yeah, so I mean, what I've seen, it really starts to depend, and maybe we can like split it up first by level, and look at the differences there, but then maybe across like different non-functional concerns. But the first thing to note is, like, typically if you step into an organization, a lot of what's happening at the lower levels with unit testing or even API testing is still pretty standard. Like, they're not like customizing a framework for unit testing, right? They're taking something out of the box, whether it be JUnit or PyUnit or whatever, and they have their practices in place for code styling and different ways to make sure that their code quality is good. But the framework is relatively vanilla. As we go up the levels, as we go closer to UI testing, that's where you start to see people trying to customize that framework and have abstractions around it. And the challenges when it comes to large language models is that the accuracy of your generation and the usefulness and different metrics that you can kind of slice on those dimensions comes down to like how well it fits your specific problem. And so if you're having a heavily customized framework at the top level, well, these models weren't trained on your specific framework. And therefore, you have to feed it a little bit of a broader context to be able to accurately generate things that fit into how you define things in your organization. And so this is possible, but again, not necessarily out of the box does it just give you those needs. It requires a little bit more knowledge. And so I would say that when I look at unit and API level testing, those things are pretty straightforward when it comes to generation and the frameworks that are supported in the most popular frameworks. As you start to customize frameworks, even at the API level or more so at the UI level, then you need to look into some more advanced techniques where you can take a larger portion of the code base as examples, maybe encode them as embeddings, and feed that larger context to your LLM so that it can now generate meaningful tests. And one thing I'll note, Jeff, that should be done in any case, either way, if it's very accurate generation or not, there should still be some review process in place, because as we know, like, these things can still hallucinate. And yeah, it happens.
You mean they don't give you the perfect answer every time, Tariq? Is that what you're saying?
They don't even give you a real answer. They give you an imaginary answer. Like, imaginary numbers all over again, right?
But very
So,
convincing sometimes too, right? Like with certainty, they will tell you something that you know by looking at it is wrong, right? It's just
yeah,
wrong.
very much so. My wife will probably say the same thing about when I argue with her on certain
Yeah, I
topics.
was gonna
So,
say, sounds like
yeah.
what husbands deal with all the time, right? Spouses, we'll see. It's a common thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point though, that we want to make sure the audience hears loud and clear and that your organizations understand. And there's lots of people echoing this, which should be is this is not a silver bullet and this is not removing humans from the loop.
Mhm.
Because these models do some pretty incredible things. They can produce some pretty incredible tests and other things. I've seen, to your point, Tariq, very nice test suites created. But if you look at it, there's always some things that aren't right or that
Yeah.
aren't accurate. And that means you have to review closely what comes out. If you just blindly, put prompts into a generative AI system and it spits something out, and you just take it and ship it, you're gonna find out that's a very bad strategy.
Yeah, there's one other thing there, Jeff, as well too, that I don't want people to lose sight of, because as we normally start talking about generative AI, we're normally focused on using it for some specific task. One thing to remember, in addition to the review process, is just holistically looking at your life cycle, because you could maybe spit out code faster, but if it is crappy code, or if testing can't keep pace with it, or if even the business can't keep up with feeding you user stories fast enough, then there's usually a queue building up where things are just sitting there. And even though you're using generative AI trying to speed up the process, like what you end up with is a bit of a bottleneck, ironically, in your process. So just making sure that you're looking at it holistically and you're swarming on things as queues start to build up, so that you're not spending the additional time in a queue waiting. Kind of negates the productivity purpose if you're waiting all that time.
No, that's a great point. I mean, we do a lot of value stream analysis, value mapping for customers, trying to get them to understand the end-to-end flow of their, like say, CI/CD process. And to your point, one thing you learn very early when you're looking at DevOps and kind of looking at flow is it's all about removing the bottlenecks. If there's a bottleneck in that system, it doesn't matter how fast everything before that went. You're not going to get anything out the door any quicker. You're just going to queue things up behind the bottleneck, and the bottleneck's going to get bigger. And you're alluding to AI. You could fall into that trap. You could automate things very quickly that don't actually help you get anything faster into production with quality.
Yep,
Great point. Yeah, so that's today. That's what's going on today. What's tomorrow look like? What's out there that you see that's possible? I know, I'd say 2, 3, 4 years ago, you, Jason Arbonne, others in this field were saying there's going to be a day where machines write code. There's going to be a day where machines write tests. There's going to be a day where the whole world's going to change. And that's coming true. Right. Yep. So now I want to hear what, Tariq? Are we going to all be able to retire and just kick back? Or, what is AI going to be in terms of testing able to do, we hope in the future, that right now it cannot do, that you see?
Yeah, and this is an important point. And I mean, someone asked me the other day, like, how do I like predict things, or how do we? And it's actually not that difficult to predict. And the challenge is that, like, anyone really that has been working in this space, for example, before ChatGPT came along, we were using GPT-3. And if you ask me, like, how are the bots generating our test cases, like, there was a lot behind that. There was a lot behind computer vision. And now these days, all these things have become things that are at our fingertips. And now we're also seeing multimodal aspects of these large language models, where vision and text generation and analysis are all coming together. The truth is, and I think we've seen pockets of this, the truth is that a lot of the traditional engineering and testing tasks are going to become things that, and other aspects of software development, other roles. But let's just stick here in development and testing, for example, initially, they are going to get taken over by AI. It's already happening if you look at folks who are using these tools. Of course, there's still a check and a balance. But remember, the cool thing about AI is that even with human in the loop, like that now becomes training data. So right now we're at this initial stage where, like, yes, there are mistakes that are happening and we can't trust it, right? But I predict that in a few, like, we'll start to see these things become better and better, and there'll be more and more trust. Right now, people trust them quite a bit, even without having earned that trust. But imagine when it does become something that you can look at and, like, 9 out of 10 times, like, the right answer. And then that just starts to get better and better over time. So I predict that you'll start to see, and actually, Jason Arvin actually just posed a pretty interesting article on the first AI testing team. And we've seen, if you've been paying attention, you saw an AI software engineer called Devin
AI.
that was pushed out there. Yeah. So this is coming, and a lot of people have been very skeptical that AI will take on certain functions. And it's not about replacing humans. I use my words very carefully there. There are certain functions that we are doing these days that AI will take over, and it will get better at doing them and more efficient than we are. Similar to how we have calculators, and that now it's not a great thing for humans to be able to calculate things really quickly in their minds. It still looks impressive when you can do it, but there's machines for that, right? And there'll be machines for some of the things that we've been doing. And so the future first starts there in recognizing that some of the traditional software engineering, composing UIs, designing them, actually adding code behind them, getting the logic for the system, even the architecture in place, like all of these different pieces are things that you see now individually can be done. And it is tying them all together that is the kind of sweet spot that we need to now. And I anticipate that'll be coming. And once that's here, it'll be a different type of engineering, literally. One people teams, literally driving a lot of development. So
that's cool. No, interesting stuff. We talked about one myth that's out there, and that is that, these systems today, they just spit out perfect stuff, and you should just, take what comes out of a Gen AI solution and just run with it. Are there other myths or things that people believe today about AI and its use in testing that aren't really true, or things you hear, marketing say, or someone says that you're like, that's a little bit too much right now, right? And anything jump to mind that people in the audience should be aware of when they're looking at, AI solutions?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of this unfortunate, like, misinformation out there. And, even though we just kind of went from this place of talking about the future and where AI will go and the potential that it has, I think people need to recognize that right now, like, our current state that we talk about is still very much that there's huge limitations on what AI can do, and without the intervention of, like, humans being in the loop. So don't get confused. In general, you still hear these promises about, I don't know, 100% coverage or bug-free software, and it all is tied to, like, hey, use AI and that this kind of role will fall into place and it'll be fully tested and all of this stuff. Like, even when AI does take over a certain task, let's be real about it. Like, there's no such thing as bug-free software. That's never something that's going to be there. It needs to meet the needs of human beings, and we know that production is such a wild, wild west that there's just no way, right? The other thing I would say that continues to be something that people should watch out for are, like, the ideas that this. I mean, there's still a lot of skepticism in the space, and so some people go from kind of relying too much on AI and saying it'll do everything and it'll get 100%, and then others are like, yeah, no, this is just another wave. This is just hype. Like, this is not real. There's nothing to be of concern here. Like, this is not anything. And I think that that's equally dangerous, because I think that anyone who's been looking at the space for a while can see that this is quite different from a lot of the other kind of cycles that we've been through,
Mhm.
and that there is a huge potential here for transformation across industries, across different verticals. AI is definitely here, and within testing, like we're seeing it being applied to almost every area. And that has not been the case prior, right? There's been certain areas that have been hot spots, right? Like self-healing, et
Yeah.
cetera. Like, and now we've seen a shift. Like now the majority answer is around like test generation. Like you look back a couple of years ago, that would never have been even, might not even have been on that list, right?
Yeah.
So I think that like be aware of folks who are saying like this is nothing, ignore it, it'll pass, because that also is not true, and it's a negative part of the hypeness of AI, right? In the opposite direction that we should just also not entertain.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It is here, and it is not a fad. For anybody out there
Yep.
listening, it is not a fad. I always used to say that the key to being successful in business is being able to just differentiate between fads and trends, right? Because so much stuff gets thrown at us, particularly in technology, as you know, and so many new things pop up, and you have to decide, is this something that I think I should invest in or not? I remember when the web hit, right? Being an old guy,
Mm-hmm.
when the web hit, a lot of skepticism around the web when it first came out. And it took quite a while, even for businesses to get fully on board. We had to go through a, dot-com bomb and come
Yeah.
out the other side first. But it was, to me, something that was a game changer. You could see the potential of it, to your point. Still a lot of potential, right? Some uses, some interesting things, but potential. I feel like AI is the same way. And in fact, some people say, oh, it's going to be much bigger than what the web did to businesses and to technology. It's going to be as big as the Industrial Revolution. This is the next wave of the
Yep.
Industrial Revolution. I don't know how big it is, right? I can't predict the
Yeah.
future, but I do know that this is not a fad. It is not going away.
Yeah. One other key point, Jeff, specific to testing that I like to make sure people recognize is that at the end of the day, these are still systems themselves. And because people always ask and worry about the testing profession itself. And I just wrote an article series on testing AI systems and looking at it holistically from both, kind of pre-release validation and verification to also like a post-release continuous validation and verification. Because how I see all this unfolding is that while we will get better and better at automating a lot of these traditional tasks, like someone still has to build and maintain and validate these AI systems. And so that is also going to be where I think the software testing community and folks who have a testing mindset will thrive and probably be, I said earlier, be a one-person show. I think it can be a one-person show, especially if that person has a testing mindset and has a very holistic view for all the way from the customer to the implementation and the technology to like post-release and evolution. Now, maybe that's not one person, but
Yeah.
in a small setting for a new product, it very well could be. And the mindset that gives you the best value there is the testing mindset. So I always urge people in the space to think, hey, your testing mindset could be the thing that helps to train the models. It could be the thing that helps to validate the models and monitor them after they've been deployed. Those are huge skills for us to just highlight from a human perspective.
That's awesome. And that gets us into our next topic, which is, if you're a tester out there, whether you're a manual tester, an automated tester, and the AI age, if you will, is upon us. We think this is a trend, not a fad. What are the skills that you should be investing in, and what are the things you should be learning that are going to help you be effective in this age? Keep a good job and earn a wage and be productive. And what are those things, do you think, for testers?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a lot of the foundational pieces. Like you were talking about myths earlier. One of the myths that people have is that like AI requires like this huge knowledge of coding. implementation actually is quite the opposite. A lot of things that were programming tasks become data tasks, and a lot of things that require your problem solving abilities to kind of shine through into the implementation really just rely on critical thinking skills, and a lot of those like core problem solving skills that we develop over the years, especially if have been in the testing profession. So I would say making sure that you're investing in that continuous knowledge improvement in your profession as a software tester. Critical thinking, what we call thinking outside the box. A lot of the collaboration skills, a lot of the holistic user empathy skills. These are all skills that are going to be needed in the future of engineering more than ever, because the machine will be engaged more in a lot of the lower level tasks. And therefore, how do you know if this is really working for a human? Well, quite frankly, only a human can really tell you that. So don't look past that. I think in addition to it, it is not necessarily something that everyone needs to get deep into, but you should understand and have a core competence of how AI works and how these systems are trained to some degree, and how to kind of identify and spot issues, right? How to measure and evaluate them. Like, this is, again, a huge open area, as everyone is kind of focused on using AI for test generation and all these things. Part of me is screaming, saying, hey, let's look at how to evaluate and test the AI, how to measure things both practically and not just in theory, so that we can have AI that is very useful to us in accomplishing tasks, right? And that we can do things like determine when it is hallucinating and measure that to some degree. So these are new skills, so to speak, or at least areas where you can gain new knowledge and apply your existing skill set to now become a part of this new age of testing in the AI world, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah. How about this whole new discipline called prompt engineering? How important do you feel like that is? I've heard people say, oh, that's just the first generation. Prompts are going to go away as AI gets smarter, and it's going to figure out what to prompt itself. And you're not going to have to really learn how to prompt like right now we're, kind of teaching people how to do. What do you think about prompt engineering as a skill set, and how important is that to testers?
No, well, I would say outrightly that I disagree. That is just something that is it's almost like saying that, we still have people, I won't call any names in my family, but I saw people in my family who can't find something on Google. And so you have to ask yourself, like, well, does that mean that there's like
Google's
a gap
bad, or...
and there's their ability to actually ask the right question in a way, or just put in the right query string? And the fact is that if you don't ask the right question, you will not get the right answer. So prompt engineering definitely, again, it's a very low barrier to entry way of guiding the model to what you need. And these are large language models. So again, you're talking about a lot of information, a lot of data. If you aren't guiding it correctly to what you want, then you're probably not going to get a very useful response. So I would disagree highly that like this is something that like you don't need. You definitely need to understand that this is also not about a one-shot question. Usually, this is about understanding that once you ask this model a question and you see kind of the response, how do you build on that to really narrow it down? And if that these models are moving in production sometimes, right? They're things that are generating things dynamically, and it's not easy to kind of pin it down to one specific answer. So if you aren't skilled in that, you won't recognize some of the nuances that are coming back that are different when you start talking about generative AI. You won't know how to use that response to now tailor your prompt to get you to where you need to go. And we'll start to have issues because this is being baked into all of our, software systems are using these models behind the scenes. So I think definitely prompt engineering. I think the other aspect of it that will be something that folks need to get into that is not talked about as much is monitoring as applies to AI systems in production and observability of AI, and how to look at drift and when these models start to deviate from, either the training set that was used to train them, or like responses start to kind of get out of bounds because like now you're dealing with ethical concerns like bias and fairness and so on and so forth. Like these are all good skills for folks to dive into.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. We touched upon the last topic a little bit earlier, but I'm kind of curious, what do you think the job market outlook is for testers in this AI world? I'm suspecting based on your previous comments that you're pretty bullish on the fact that, testers bring a set of skills to the table that are going to be needed to not only validate that what AI produces is correct, but that validate that the models and the data that the models are training on is all correct. I'm guessing that means to me you feel pretty bullish about testers in the world going forward, and you're not predicting, Dana AI that's going to come along and completely eradicate testers, like some people are saying that Devon AI, the auto AI-based software developer is going to do to developers.
Yeah, so you're accurate in my kind of position on it. I do think that, for example, a lot of other roles might be replaced before testers get replaced, and that goes back to like the original statement of if we start thinking about this and really what has shifted, like what is the new model of programming? Well, if the new model of programming is using data to program machines, then testers have a bunch of skills around data and how to slice data up, and can really tell you how to shape a black box of inputs to outputs, right? Like this is a core fundamental principle of many of these AI systems that are black boxes. Now, every AI system is a black box, but most of the ones we've been talking about today are very much these huge black boxes. On top of that, like I think there's huge potential for testers to actually start picking and choosing what they want, which area they want to dive into, right? Like one of my favorite areas to geek out on and nerd out on, if anyone knows me, is the area of adversarial networks. And I think this is just like a brilliant way for testers to kind of break into the space, is thinking about, hey, how can I help to design models that will try to break other models or go against what their purpose is, and then feed that back into making it better. Like this is the ultimate like quality assurance goal. This is what we do all the time. Like we try to break the software, we try to break the system to get information that we can now feed to engineering to build it better, right? And now this adversarial networks basically automates that whole process. And whether it be for security purposes, whether it be for more general quality purposes, like this is a huge. I see testers having bigger titles that they have the skills for, but they just need to kind of figure out how do I learn the lingo and kind of get into that space and bring the skills that I have to the table.
Good stuff, Tariq. We're going to take questions in a minute, as Todd mentioned. Before we do that, though, I want to make a couple of announcements, and then we're going to jump right into questions. So for those of you interested in learning more, there's some upcoming opportunities to do so. Get yourself up to speed on AI practices as associated with testing. At Coveros, we have a couple of upcoming live virtual classes you might be interested in. Agile test automation for practitioners, test automation engineering. Those are virtual classes. 2 upcoming conferences I know Tariq's going to be at and is keynoting as well. Our classic Star East, testing conference, which is going to have lots of AI content in it. And also, for those of you not aware, we started a new conference this year all around AI. So if you're trying to get up to speed on AI, you want to learn what this is all about, Tariq mentioned, just understanding how AI works and machine learning works and Gen AI works is going to help you in your career. This entire conference is catered to those who are in this webinar. People who are practitioners, people who are trying to leverage AI and learn how it applies to you. As a thank you for anybody who's attended here today, there's some discount codes down bottom that you can use to register for these events. Star East is going to be coming up here late April. AICon is going to be in early June. And we'd love to see you all at these events. A few highlights just for the new AICon conference, because people aren't very familiar with it. We are starting with multi-day classes, as we usually do in our conferences. I'm teaching the Getting Started with Machine Learning. This is a new class that we built this year, and it's exactly what Tariq was mentioning. It's an introduction to AI and machine learning. What are the types of learning? How does Gen AI work and prompt engineering? What is the software development process and testing process look for, AI and machine learning? How are the different roles? What are the roles in that process? And we talk some about automation as well. So if you're interested in getting up to speed, that's a great class. There's also some great tutorials. Tariq's got a bunch that he's giving, including his keynote on humanizing AI. And we've got some other tutorials around. You mentioned data, Tariq. I think one thing that might interest this audience is there's a number of tutorials around how do you engineer your data, how do you leverage AI to engineer your data, because as Tariq mentioned, the whole industry is shifting a little bit to some of the things that we used to do that were considered coding are now more data challenges. And so there's lots of good information. Would love to see everyone at the events. Anything you want to say, Tariq, about your keynote or tutorials, what you'll be doing at AICon?
Well, I just hope to see people there. I think it's going to be exciting. It's really great to have this be a focused conference. To me, it's the beginning of something great. So I'm happy to be a part of the first iteration of it and to be giving a keynote. But I'd encourage people, if you haven't up to this point gotten engaged in a lot of this content, of course, these have been sprinkled throughout Tech World conferences for years. But if you haven't, and for some reason you're behind the game, then definitely attend AICon USA. It'll probably be the fastest track to getting up to speed if you've missed out on the last few years of AI in testing or engineering or DevOps or all of the above. So see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the audience, one of the reasons we started this conference is because there are other AI conferences out there. There's lots of AI content being thrown around. Our observation was that a lot of the AI conferences that currently exist are focused either on the academics, so the model development component, right? Or hardcore engineers who are looking for a lot of math, basically. And, as we've been talking, AI is something that everyone in a business, including testers, need to understand to be effective. And that means that you need content catered to practitioners, to leaders of those teams and those organizations. And that's what this conference is focused on, just like the other conferences we have. So we're pretty excited about it. Right now, type a message to your boss. Tell them you want to go to this thing. Bring all your friends. It's gonna be a lot of fun. You get to meet Tariq too, which is always a good thing. We are going to take questions here in a second. Just a reminder for those of you not familiar with the TechWell Hub. It is a Slack-based community of software professionals. There's a boatload of different channels in that. In the TechWell Hub, you can sign up for free at hub.techwell.com. And in fact, what we usually do at these webinars is we're going to take questions, but I'm sure we won't get to all of your questions. If you have additional questions after this, we're going to head to the Hub. And one of the channels is AI_testing. It's at the bottom of the screen here. And we will be there to answer additional questions that you have and hang out for a bit and chat about AI and testing. So, hub.techwell.com. If you're not a member, join us right after this webinar at AI_testing, and we can talk further about these subjects. I do want to announce our next webinar. So many people know Bob Martin. He goes by Uncle Bob sometimes. So he's a longtime hardcore software engineering leader. He's written some great books, Clean Code, and some others that are very popular in the industry. And he's going to be talking about the impact AI has on the entire software development process. Tariq alluded to the fact that all this stuff is starting to get integrated together in AI, and we're starting to see, some things in the future maybe that impact the entire SDLC. That's what I'm going to be talking to Bob about. Probably June-ish. It says summer here, but we'll probably try to get it in before everybody starts heading out to vacations and whatnot. You're on our mailing list, so we'll get information out to everybody on this webinar on when that event is actually going to happen. So with that, I want to thank everybody and open it up to questions. Todd, do you want to run through the questions that we've seen in chat, and please add more questions into chat?
Sure. So we've got a few so far. The first
Great.
one is from Seema. How are you guys using I'm assuming AI for test script generation? Is it by integration in an IDE with an AI tool like a Copilot, or is it some other way?
Yeah, this is a great question. There are kind of multiple avenues. So what I try to describe to people is that you want to bring AI into the tools that your teams are using. Some of those may be communication channels, like things like Slack or Microsoft Teams. For example, a lot of EPAM and Test.io are either in Teams or Slack. And so we've brought this technology to those channels. And some quality engineers may use those channels to do things like test generation, right? Or test documentation and so on and so forth. However, as you start thinking about more implementation-based testing, like it becomes less useful to generate things in those kind of chat communication windows and better to integrate into the IDE. So we actually have a project that is, organization-wide called Alita that, which will also probably be something that we kind of show at AICon. But the whole idea there is that that is a collaboration platform where a lot of these things, if you're living in an IDE, if you're living in IntelliJ, or you're living in Visual Studio, like there's a plugin that you can install there into that. If there's things like Jira, where that's maybe where you live because you're a business analyst, like AI needs to come there as well. And so depending on what you're trying to do, and what you're trying to facilitate, AI should come to you in that role. So the answer there is like, we do it in both places, right? But most of the code-based generation actually happens within the IDE because you can review it, you can compile it, you can run it, you can make sure it works good, and then you can integrate it into your pipeline in one shot. So it makes sense.
Yeah, I would add to that, Tariq, and I'm sure you've seen this too. For those in the audience who work for anyone that's building test or test automation, test management, test automation tools, I've been meeting with as many people as I can get my hands on across the industry to understand how various tools in our testing market are trying to integrate AI into them. And there's some great stuff being done out there, and you'll see a lot of those tools and capabilities at Star East and at AICon if you come. Definitely the test tool vendors are integrating into their products, AI capabilities to help you do things, in a quicker, more automated way within their products too. I've seen everything from, obviously, test script generation out of specific tools for their particular, script language or whatever. I've seen, test management solutions that will automatically try to identify issues with your traceability or the issues between your tests and your requirements. There's lots of that kind of stuff bubbling around out there, and definitely check those tools out.
Sure.
Great. Okay, the next one from Charles is, how do you handle test data required for tests using AI? Do all of your product DBs have APIs that AI can interface with?
Yeah, so again, this is probably more of a what fits your need kind of question. You can certainly, if you have invested in your APIs for test data generation and you want to augment those systems with AI, then that is definitely something that you can and should do. In other cases, some folks have heavily invested in test data management tools and synthetic test data generators that completely sit outside of those kind of calls and really act on individual databases to generate kind of data, synthetic data that you need. And so you can look at it from more of dedicated tooling perspective. Or some people are just literally generating the data that they need and then just hard coding it into their scripts, right? Like there's pros and cons to any of these techniques, whether or not you're using API calls. And I try not to be a purist. There are people that say, no, you should not hard code anything there. It should all be calls and blah, blah. There's others that see the other side of the spectrum. Really, it depends on the problem that you're solving, your organization, how things are really set up for you and what makes sense. Like I'm a big fan of applying the common sense principle, which means just do what makes sense for you in a given moment. Don't try to over-engineer too much. But I think the important thing is to recognize that now we can do some pretty cool things with test data generation. And if you're seeing that you're having problems maintaining however you're doing it, then looking to another approach because it might not be working for you.
Yeah, that's good advice, Tariq. And for anyone that is interested in AICon, there's 2 tutorials on data at the conference that I think you'll find interesting. One is all about, how do you strategically decide and define your data sets so that your training is done effectively and you get the right kinds of results. And the other one is how do you supplement your data using AI models? So can you get AI models to generate and supplement the data you have if you don't have enough data? I think those are both really great tutorials to check out if you're interested in solving the data problem.
Great. 2 more here. One is from Mohammed. How do you use AI with model-based code?
Well, I mean, so it all goes into what you have actually designed, right? When I think of model-based code, like to me, you're just defining some model. It could be a state machine, it could be any other model of the software, and you're typically using that model to generate, some outcome, right? So if you already have some model-based test generation system, for example, AI can certainly augment that. And I'll give you a concrete example. For example, like a lot of the kind of core model-based generation for web applications used to take like the page flow diagram of a web application that really gives you the navigational structure as to how to get through the application and navigate to different portions of it. Typically, the hardest part of actually using that model to generate meaningful tests is that data is kind of hard to know which data actually takes you along a particular edge. So if you can now say, okay, well, I have this model, I have my page flow, I have some algorithm for traversing the model and giving me test sequences, but now I don't have the data. Now you can take something like AI and generate data and then plug that data in and see which edges are actually getting traversed, right? So looking at that, saying, hey, this requires an address, a name, blah, blah, synthetically plugging that in using AI and then traversing your model. So I mean, that's just one example. I don't know what exactly you're dealing with, but there's probably many ways that you can use AI to kind of integrate with any kind of model-based test generation system.
One last question. This one's a little bit interesting. What is your opinion on the energy demands required to host the infrastructure that gives us AI technology like GPT, LLM, etc.? Will this impact the evolution or use of the technology as it relates to QA? Maybe this will be the new bottleneck.
Yeah, I like this question because it starts with what is my opinion. So I can't give a wrong answer to this one. I might not give a popular answer, but I think, look, I think as human beings, like first of all, like we have a responsibility to humanity. Probably why we're doing a keynote called Humanizing AI. But these are real problems, right? Like, and you look at it these days, like a lot of the tech giants are very concerned about, emissions and different aspects that really can impact like our planet, right? And yes, the truth is that there is a lot of energy that goes into both hosting as well as training. And I mean, there's a process here. I think it will come down to thinking about the cost benefits and actually just being responsible. Like we normally, when we think about responsible AI, we're thinking about ethics and so on and so forth. But I think when I view responsible AI, there's everything that deals with sustainability of what we're doing should also come into play. But I think what it normally should drive, if to answer the second part of the question, is that it should drive us to find more efficient ways of doing things. And, you know, I think, again, this is something that is at the forefront of some of the tech giants, but I think it's really, even on an individual level, for us to start thinking about how do we solve these problems? How can we use this technology that helps us move the needle forward on some things, but do it in a very responsible way, a very efficient way for us, right? Whether or not it'll become the bottleneck depends on whether or not we use those constraints to innovate and become better at it. I really don't know what'll happen there, but we'll see.
Yeah, I would add to that, you know, there's a lot of writing right now about, you know, some are calling them small language models or micro language models, or ways to solve problems with models that are maybe more specific to a solution or a domain, that are a lot smaller, therefore take up a lot less energy consumption to train and build. And some people are thinking, hey, maybe this idea that we're just going to keep making these large language models just bigger and bigger and bigger, and just have them, you know, cost more and more to create and train and retrain, is the wrong approach. Maybe we should have small models and figure out a way to get them to communicate and collaborate. Some people are arguing that's really the way our brain actually works. It's not a big model, it's a bunch of small models with interfaces and interconnections. And maybe that will, one, result in better results, but two, is help with some of the, you know, things like energy demands. Maybe, right? I don't know if you've been tracking that, Tariq, or not. You believe that argument, but that's something I've heard people are pushing out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've definitely given some of this some thought with respect to, like you said, most of that conversation comes up because of things like accuracy and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But whether or not will help us become more efficient, I don't know. If each of those small models grows and become large models, then we, you know, even if they remain relatively small, it could still be death by a thousand cuts. I think at the end of the day, it really just comes down to like making sure that we're looking at the return on the investment. And if it's costing us this and we're trying to become more efficient, that's one thing. But what are we using it for? Is it really helping us to move the needle as, you know, a larger, bigger picture? Is it helping us? Because maybe it's saving lives in some cases, and this is worth what is happening. But maybe it's not. So who knows? Maybe Jeff, you'll be the one to help pioneer that quantification model to determine success.
Yeah, I think we'll turn that over to the next generation. We'll watch, we'll encourage.
I was hoping you'd have a good solution by the time you retire, maybe.
Nothing at the, you know, my fingertips. Todd, looks like we're out of time.
Yep, and that's all the questions we got as well. So.
Oh, good. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. We are going to head over to the TechWell Hub for anybody that wants to chat, catch up, say hi to Tariq. Join us over there in the AI_testing channel. We'll be over there in a couple minutes. Thanks everybody for sticking around.
See you folks. Bye-bye.